April 1945. The sea off Okinawa burned with drifting oil and shattered hulls when a vast white ship appeared through the haze, her green crosses glowing under morning sun. To the Japanese prisoners crowded on a nearby destroyer hulk, it looked like a ghost. The vessel was USS Haven, AH-12, 15,000 tons of antiseptic steel and mercy. As she dropped anchor, the wind carried the sound of turbines powering electric lights, suction pumps, and sterilizers. When stretcher teams began unloading wounded Americans, Japanese officers were summoned aboard as observers under Geneva supervision. They climbed the gangway expecting propaganda. Instead, they entered a world that defied everything they believed about war. The corridors gleamed with white enamel. Inside one ward, a surgeon adjusted an X-ray lamp while a nurse prepared penicillin. Another team operated beneath a flood of electric light that never flickered, even as artillery thundered beyond the horizon. The visitors stood speechless. Their own hospital ships, converted passenger liners, carried no radiology, no refrigeration, no anesthesia beyond chloroform. Here wounded men awoke clean, transfused, alive. Commander Kiyoshi Sato whispered, "Impossible. This is not a ship. It is a city." By nightfall, Haven's log recorded over 400 surgeries completed, every patient catalogued and stabilized. The Japanese observers returned to shore silent, their faces pale. For the first time, they had witnessed an enemy who could heal as powerfully as he fought. But how had the Americans created these floating hospitals in the midst of total war? 3 years before that moment off Okinawa, Japan's naval surgeons believed their own system to be unmatched. In Asia, official directives from the Imperial Navy's Medical Bureau boasted of self-sufficient hospital transports and surgical excellence within the fleet. The reality, preserved in wartime memoranda, was starkly different. The Hikawa Maru, Japan's flagship hospital vessel, offered barely 300 beds, its operating room powered by a single diesel generator, often darkened by salt corrosion. Instruments rusted in humid holds. Refrigeration for plasma or blood did not exist. Yet in Tokyo, the rhetoric of invincibility continued. Surgeon Rear Admiral Matsumoto's 1943 address to naval staff declared, "Our enemy lacks the discipline to treat his wounded swiftly. His ships will drown in red tape before blood." Japanese medical officers trained under this belief, memorizing procedures suited for island bases, not mobile warfare. They trusted that American medical logistics were slow, bureaucratic, and technologically backward. Even when reports reached the mainland describing American white ships near Saipan and Leyte, Imperial intelligence dismissed them as hospital transports, hulks merely ferrying the wounded to Hawaii. No one imagined a self-contained surgical city moving with the fleet. The Japanese Navy's obsession with offense left no capacity for mercy. The concept of devoting 15,000 tons of steel to healing was inconceivable in a war of attrition. Captured communication decrypts later revealed this mindset clearly. A combined fleet message from early 1945, translated after the war, read, "Enemy medical evacuation remains cumbersome. Continued attacks will overwhelm his recovery forces." That assumption guided strategy at Okinawa, a fatal miscalculation. Inside Japan's hospitals, surgeons worked by kerosene lamp, recording mortality rates above 50% for abdominal wounds. The medical creed of Bushido, honor over survival, became a substitute for resources. Confidence was absolute, but it was faith without foundation. When the USS Haven arrived in those same waters months later, gleaming under sterile light, every illusion collapsed. The enemy they believed clumsy had built a floating civilization. In early 1942, America's Pacific medical network was in shambles. The attack on Pearl Harbor had crippled not only battleships, but also the island's hospital capacity. Surgeons operated in basements, nurses improvised gauze from curtains, and evacuation routes stretched thousands of miles. The Pacific Fleet medical log recorded bluntly, average time from wound to hospital treatment, 21 days. For many, that delay meant death by infection long before reaching safety. Field reports from Guadalcanal painted a desperate picture. Supply barges sank before reaching shore. Morphine was rationed by the drop, and half the wounded men arrived at hospital stations already septic. Even as American industry roared to life, medical planners faced brutal arithmetic. A war fought across 7,000 miles of ocean with no permanent bases near the front. Allied observers doubted a remedy existed. British naval officials warned Washington that floating hospitals were logistically absurd. Congress hesitated to divert shipyard capacity when destroyers were needed. Public confidence faltered. Life magazine warned that Pacific casualties perish on the voyage home. Yet amid skepticism, a small group of naval surgeons and engineers believed otherwise. Commander Arthur Beale, a former merchant marine officer, argued in a classified memorandum that the only way to save men is to bring the hospital to the battle. He and Captain Charles C. Lyon sketched early designs for self-contained medical ships. Powered by independent generators, equipped with sterilizers, X-ray units, and air-conditioned wards, blueprints for the Haven class. The proposal faced fierce resistance. One admiral scoffed, "Hospitals don't win wars." But the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery persisted, securing authorization in March 1943 under Memo M32. The order's final line became prophetic. Hospital ships shall match the standard of any land-based hospital save immobility. America had found its answer, not in numbers or firepower, but in ingenuity. The secret behind America's medical revolution at sea began not in an admiral's office, but inside the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery in Washington, D.C., in 1943, as the Navy reeled from casualty reports pouring in from Tarawa and Bougainville. A classified task group known as the Fleet Hospital Committee was formed. Their mission, make recovery as mobile as combat. Engineers and surgeons worked side by side to design the impossible, a self-contained, 1,000-bed hospital that could sterilize instruments, transfuse plasma, and even conduct radiology while underway. Every component was reimagined for maritime endurance. General Electric developed shock-resistant X-ray transformers. Westinghouse built microclimate air systems to maintain operating room sterility in tropical heat. Each ship required miles of copper, wiring, and thousands of gallons of distilled water daily to maintain surgical cleanliness. Blueprints for what became the Haven-class hospital ship emerged from Sun Shipbuilding Company in Chester, Pennsylvania. Naval architects enlarged tanker hulls to 15,000 tons, partitioning decks into surgical theaters, dental labs, radiology wards, and blood storage refrigeration rooms capable of cooling to a steady 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Below decks, entire wards were isolated with negative pressure ventilation to prevent cross-infection, an innovation years ahead of civilian hospitals. To protect them in combat zones, the ships bore towering green crosses illuminated at night, signaling neutrality under the 1929 Geneva Convention. But commanders knew the real protection came from visibility. Admiral C.W. Lyle summarized it succinctly: "We hide with lights." Testing began in late 1944. The USS Haven, Mercy, and Bountiful conducted shakedown cruises off California, performing live surgeries under simulated battle conditions. Results stunned observers. Amputation mortality dropped below 2%. Industrial might transformed vision into fleet reality. 22 shipyards coordinated nationwide to complete 8 vessels in record time. Within a year, America possessed more hospital ship tonnage than all Axis navies combined. While Japan strained to feed its fleets, the United States built ships that could feed, heal, and resurrect its wounded. Every welded bulkhead embodied a quiet triumph of moral engineering, the belief that mercy itself could be mechanized. When these ships finally sailed west into combat, their secret was not their size or technology, but the revolutionary idea that compassion could travel at flank speed. By March 1945, the Pacific swelled with steel. The U.S. 10th Army was preparing for Operation Iceberg, the invasion of Okinawa, the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War. Among the armada of gunfire and transport ships sailed a new kind of vessel. The USS Haven, USS Bountiful, and USS Solace formed the first fully operational medical flotilla in naval history. Medical orders from Fleet Surgeon. Rear Admiral C.A. Sprague positioned the hospital ships just 12 nautical miles from the Okinawa beaches, inside active combat range. Logbooks confirm they arrived under cover of night between April 2nd and April 3rd, 1945. Their task: receive the first wave of casualties within 30 minutes of contact. To achieve this, the Navy created an unprecedented shuttle system. Amphibious landing craft and DUKW duck vehicles ferried wounded directly from beach triage stations to the ship's hydraulic hoists. Weather reports recorded rough seas and intermittent squalls, yet the system functioned without pause. Within the first 72 hours, Haven alone admitted more than 2,000 wounded. Aboard ship, elevators moved stretchers through 3 decks. Sterile corridors echoed with the constant clang of surgical trays. The X-ray department operated around the clock, producing over 500 images daily to locate shrapnel and fractures. The temperature in operating rooms held steady at 72 degrees, even as Okinawa's humidity reached 90. Meanwhile, intercepted Japanese communications show utter disbelief. One officer radioed, "Enemy ships glow with crosses but never cease movement. Unknown type." His assumption: troop carriers disguised as hospitals. He had no concept of electricity sustaining full surgery at sea. As artillery flashes illuminated the horizon, the hospital ships' white hulls gleamed untouched. They were not symbols of immunity. They were proof of confidence, precision, and discipline. America had placed its hospitals on the front line. The stage was set for the moment that would astonish the enemy and redefine warfare's humanity. Okinawa, April 6, 1945. The sea boiled with fire. Waves of kamikaze aircraft, more than 350 in a single day, plunged into the U.S. invasion fleet. Destroyers burned from bow to stern, tankers erupted in fountains of oil and flame, and the horizon glowed red through drifting smoke. Yet amid the chaos, 3 white ships remained visible, motionless but radiant, their green crosses shining through the haze. They were the USS Haven, Bountiful, and Solace. At 0300 hours, stretcher teams began their grim relay. Landing craft thudded against the hospital ships' hulls, unloading men so badly wounded that some were declared dead before the gangway. Surgeons didn't stop to confirm. They simply cut, transfused, and breathed life back into the half-dead. The USS Haven's operating rooms never closed. 6 teams worked simultaneously, guided by red-lit X-ray film glowing on bulkheads. By dawn, the ship's generators powered 12 surgeries at once. At 0430, a near miss from an air-dropped bomb rattled the hull, shattering several portholes. A nurse's log later read, "Light flickered, but the knife never faltered." Captain Harold Noyes, chief radiologist, reported completing over 500 X-rays in 24 hours, each one critical for removing shrapnel from torsos and skulls that would have been amputations in 1942. At 0600, Bountiful hoisted aboard Japanese prisoners rescued from a burning transport. When American nurses treated their burns with plasma and sulfur, interpreters reported them weeping openly. One Japanese doctor murmured, "We cannot believe this mercy." By noon, the ship's decks overflowed with stretchers. Oxygen cylinders hissed. Generators throbbed beneath the deck plates. The USS Solace admitted 880 patients in a single day, a world record for naval surgery. Mortality stood below 3%. The same week captured Japanese hospital ship Takasago Maru, without refrigeration or penicillin, recorded more than 50% mortality for similar injuries. Despite constant threat of attack, None of the American hospital ships ceased operation for even an hour. Naval order logs confirm that the Haven continued surgery through every air raid, its surgeons operating in flak jackets, while anti-aircraft guns roared in the distance. By the time the sun set on that apocalyptic day, the green-crossed ships had saved more than 3,000 men. Enemy and ally alike whispered of miracles. The Japanese could destroy ships, but they could not comprehend one that defeated death itself. When word of the American hospital ship's performance at Okinawa reached Japanese command, disbelief turned to humiliation. Reports from captured officers translated after the war reveal that many refused to believe such vessels were real. Surgeon Commander Kiyoshi Sato, interrogated at Yokosuka in September 1945, described the moment he saw the USS Haven illuminated under searchlights. It looked like the Imperial Palace floating in the sea. His notes show repeated entries of the same word, fushigi, meaning impossible. The Allied translator and interpreter section compiled dozens of testimonies from captured naval surgeons. Every account carried the same astonishment. Their own ships, often converted freighters, lacked refrigeration, electricity, and modern surgical tools. "Our wounded die quickly," admitted Surgeon Lieutenant Yoshio Tanaka, "for we have nothing like this." Others confessed confusion that the enemy would waste such resources on the living when victory seemed assured. Psychologically, the revelation was devastating. For years, Japanese propaganda insisted Americans were soft, incapable of sacrifice, slaves to luxury. Yet here was the ultimate contradiction: an enemy who fought ferociously but built cathedrals of mercy on the ocean. Intelligence summaries recorded officers speaking of spiritual defeat, unable to reconcile the contrast between their own medical collapse and American abundance. After the surrender, Japanese doctors were permitted to inspect the Haven at Yokosuka. Photographs show them standing stiffly in white uniforms, gazing at sterilizers, surgical lamps, and X-ray machines that hummed quietly beneath their hands. Many wept. Admiral Arata Endo later admitted, "We thought science and compassion could not coexist in war. We were wrong. The shock reached beyond medicine." The Imperial Navy's Medical Bureau requested emergency research into American floating hospitals, but Japan's defeat ended it before it began. What remained was a haunting realization: the Americans had not only outfought them, they had out-healed them. The myth of Japan's moral and technical superiority was gone forever. By the summer of 1945, the results were undeniable. The U.S. Navy's hospital ships had become floating proof of industrial genius and moral purpose. Official Pacific Fleet statistics recorded survival rates of 96% for wounded evacuated aboard the Haven, Bountiful, and Solace. In contrast, comparable field hospitals ashore averaged 75%. Commanders credited these ships with saving over 70,000 lives before the war's end. Strategically, their effect rippled through every level of command. Admiral Chester Nimitz's medical staff noted that hospital ships shortened recovery time so drastically that thousands of men returned to duty within weeks, strengthening frontline manpower at a critical stage. Their presence near combat zones also transformed morale. Sailors reported psychological relief, knowing that survival meant not exile to distant islands, but treatment within sight of the battlefield. For the Japanese, the revelation was catastrophic. Allied interrogators recorded captured officers confessing that their troops' morale collapsed once they realized the Americans treated prisoners with better medical care than Japan offered its own soldiers. Propaganda ministries had promised the enemy was brutal and barbaric. Now, filmed evidence of American nurses tending both Allied and Axis wounded aired across occupied territories. In Washington, photographs of surgeons operating aboard the Haven appeared in Time and Life, hailed as the clean heart of the Pacific War. When newsreels of hospital ships rescuing both friend and foe reached cinemas, they stunned global audiences. The image of white vessels lit against burning seas became the war's most powerful moral counterpoint. Even before Japan's surrender, planners in the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery began designing post-war mercy fleets. Their success at Okinawa shaped doctrine for Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. The Haven class had proven that logistics could save as decisively as artillery. America's hospital ships had changed warfare's equation. Victory was now measured not only in enemy losses but in lives restored. In the years following the war, military historians came to view the U.S. Navy's hospital ships not merely as logistical triumphs, but as moral landmarks. Their success redefined what it meant to wield power responsibly in modern warfare. Academic studies from the Naval War College described the Haven-class vessels as floating embodiments of civilization's conscience. The strategic lessons were immediate. Post-war naval doctrine integrated permanent medical logistics into fleet design, ensuring every combat operation possessed mobile surgical capacity. By 1947, the Navy's medical manual included full chapters derived from Haven-class experience, detailing everything from plasma refrigeration to infection control in tropical climates. The Army and Air Force soon adapted these standards for field hospitals, reshaping how modern militaries measured readiness. Diplomatically, the impact extended far beyond American command rooms. When delegates convened in Geneva in 1949 to revise international humanitarian law, U.S. legal and medical advisors cited their wartime hospital ship records as living proof that neutrality at sea was possible even under bombardment. Those reports directly influenced the revised Geneva Convention, which expanded protections for hospital vessels and medical personnel. The Japanese, once astonished by American mercy, later absorbed its lessons into their national recovery. Under Allied occupation, the U.S. Navy facilitated exchanges between Japanese and American doctors. By 1947, medical faculty at the University of Tokyo had incorporated Western surgical sterilization and radiology, standards observed aboard the Haven. The Ministry of Health modeled post-war emergency care vessels on U.S. designs, a transformation that marked Japan's rebirth as a leader in maritime medicine. Culturally, the ships became enduring symbols of American humanitarian strength. Newsreel footage of white vessels with green crosses entering Tokyo Bay in 1945 was replayed worldwide, reminding both victors and vanquished that compassion had survived total war. Naval officers later called them weapons of decency. From Korea's hospital ships to today's USNS Mercy and Comfort, the lineage is clear. Every modern humanitarian deployment, earthquake relief, tsunami response, pandemic aid, traces its bloodline back to those wartime vessels off Okinawa. The Haven class proved a profound truth, that even amid history's darkest storm, the greatest victory belongs to those who choose to heal. By war's end, 8 great white ships bore witness to a paradox of power. They had sailed through the Pacific's inferno not to destroy, but to save. Official Navy statistics confirmed that more than 72,000 men were treated aboard these vessels, with survival rates exceeding 96%, an achievement unmatched in any theater of war. Each number represented not just medical efficiency, but a triumph of spirit over annihilation. When Admiral Chester Nimitz submitted his final report to Washington, he devoted an entire section to the hospital fleet, writing, "They restored faith in the human cause for which we fought." For Japanese officers who once believed mercy was weakness, the sight of those ships in Tokyo Bay shattered an old creed. The enemy they had been told was barbaric turned out to be the one who healed them. The Haven class became the blueprint for all future humanitarian fleets. In Korea, Vietnam, and later in disaster zones from Haiti to the Indian Ocean, their descendants, USNS Mercy and USNS Comfort, carried the same green crosses and the same promise. They proved that the technology of war could be re-engineered into the architecture of compassion. Today, when those modern white giants steam into devastated ports, they echo the legacy forged in 1945. Their hum of generators and glow of X-ray lamps still whisper the same message born in the Pacific, that civilization is measured not by how it conquers, but by how it heals. For every viewer, this story is more than history, it is inheritance. The courage to build light amid destruction is the same courage that defines humanity itself. Because in that spring of 1945, when the world teetered between savagery and salvation, America chose to float mercy. And that choice changed everything.